Well, good morning. It is very good to see everybody here this morning. I do appreciate especially the visitors that we have with us today, and I'll echo once again a word of welcome to you. Please stick around afterward. Obviously, we're going to have our goals presentation here in a few minutes, but we would love it if you'd give us an opportunity to get to know you a little bit better, and also to let us know if you have any spiritual needs. If you're curious about the gospel, if you're curious about the Bible, if you're curious about what it means to be a part of the congregation here at Monte Vista, we would love to sit down and have a Bible study with you. And please give us an opportunity to do that. I'd like to start off by reading an anecdote here from a book full of anecdotes called Fables for Today. The writer begins by saying, "The other day, I was talking with a policeman who has a great deal to do with hunting for lost children. Where do you suppose he said they always look first for the little kids that end up getting lost? Well, you could never guess it. They just start out in the direction that the wind is blowing." "Well, why do you begin in that direction?" I asked. He explained that on a windy day, that everything from a bouncing ball to a hat or a kite would just go with the wind, and the child runs after it. Then he forgets which way he came from or which direction he was going. He just goes on with the wind and forgets to go back where he started. Going with the wind is much easier than facing it. Just throwing things about the house is easier than putting them in their place. When there's work to be done and friends come along who want to play ball or go swimming, well, it's just easier to go with the wind and drift along, doing just what we want to do first. This little story reminded me of Hebrews 2 and verse 1, which says, "For this reason, we must pay much closer attention to what we have heard, lest we drift away from it." And in the same way that little kids can so easily drift away from the safe course in life, from the safe boundary of where they're supposed to be in the park or in the backyard, we also drift away in our spiritual lives. And it's always when we follow the little silly things in life too. The kid follows the kite over here. The kid drops a ball over there. The wind takes his hat and floats it away. And before the kid even realizes it, he's lost. He has no idea where he is. That's why we have to be so diligent with children, right? Because they don't even realize it. They're so innocent. They're so naive. So what's the excuse that adults have? We don't think we're so naive anymore, right? We don't believe that we're so ignorant anymore of the dangers that surround us, of the ways of the world. So why is it so easy for us to drift away, to be carried away with the wind, just like little children? The reason I'm bringing this up today is because of our goals presentation. I hope I've made it very obvious and clear enough both from Bible class and today that it is absolutely essential that we pay attention, that we listen to what the elders have to say, that we really internalize the goals that are being set before us. These aren't just little things that we have set before. These aren't just activities. This isn't just, it would be nice. We need to internalize what it means to really, really achieve the goals that are set before us. The things that the elders expect of us. The things that God expects of us. The things that we should expect from ourselves. How's your attendance? Does it always start off pretty well at the beginning of the year? Oh, I'm going to do a better job this year. I'm going to come every Sunday and every Wednesday. And by February, you're coming every Sunday. And by March, you're coming every Sunday morning. And by April, you're just going back into the same routine that you had before. This is the year that I'm finally going to read my Bible the whole way through, cover to cover. And Genesis is a lot of fun, and Exodus is pretty cool until you get to about chapter 20, and then it starts getting a little boring. And then Leviticus, you just don't even know what's going on at all in that book. This is going to be the year I finally break that sinful habit. And things are good for January and February, and then in March you slip up and by April things are back to normal. When we set goals for ourselves, both as a church and for ourselves as individuals, nobody ever plans on drifting away from those goals. Nobody wakes up and says, I'm going to set a lofty goal for myself, and little by little, bit by bit, I'm going to fail to reach that goal. Nobody sets out like that. It's Hebrews 2 verse 1. It's Hebrews 2 verse 1. We must pay much closer attention to what we have heard, lest we drift away from it. So like little children running after a wind-driven kite, we barely even notice the way that we're drifting away from the path of God. Or as one writer put it in his commentary on the book of Hebrews, commentary on this very verse, notice what Milligan says on this. If it is anyone's purpose to go into ruin with the devil and his angels, it's an easy matter for him to do so. No exertion on his part is at all necessary. Like a man that is afloat above the falls of Niagara, he has but to fold his arms, give himself up to the natural current, and very soon he will be beyond the reach of mercy. And that's how drifting is. Drifting doesn't require anything from you, does it? Following after the wind, following the current, it doesn't ask anything of you. So it is our natural and it is our easy tendency to drift away from faithfulness, not toward it. Let's consider 3 verses that describe the wind-driven person. Each of these verses, I think, does a good job of illustrating the point that we're trying to make this morning. Let's start off by opening up our Bibles to James 1, verse 6. Notice in James 1 and verse 6, the wind-driven person here. But he must ask in faith, he says, the person asking for wisdom, that is. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him pray to God who gives in abundance. But he must ask in faith without doubting. For the one who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. This is the person, I think, who refuses to commit to God in a really meaningful way. I'm actually surprised sometimes. When you talk to Christians, I'm actually surprised sometimes at how non-committal they tend to be about things in the Bible. I don't really know exactly the Holy Spirit. Well, I don't know really what the Holy Spirit is. Does it really matter? You know, I don't really think it's that big of a deal if you believe in premillennialism or not. I mean, in the end, we all believe in the same God, and we believe God's going to judge. How He judges is not really that material. Does it really matter if you believe in 6 literal days of creation? I mean, what's the big deal? Maybe it's just a symbol. Maybe the whole thing's an allegory. We all still believe God created the world, don't we? It surprises me sometimes how non-committal Christians can be on things out of the Bible. And some things that can be very, very essential to our faith and our theology. Be very, very careful. Because when you refuse to commit, when you refuse to believe that there is something firm, a foundation, when you refuse to accept that truth is truth and falsehood is falsehood, be very, very careful, because you will end up, as James 1 verse 6 says, tossed about like the surf of the sea. Thrown around. If you don't believe in truth, you just might end up believing anything. I think that's a very true thing. If you don't believe in truth, you might end up just believing in anything. And you see that played out in Christians' lives as well. For people who don't believe in the resurrection. For people who don't believe in a literal creation account in the book of Genesis. For people who don't believe in the miracles that are written in the Gospels. For people who don't believe that the Bible is all sufficient. Those things don't stay in a vacuum. They impact other areas of your belief. They impact other areas of your spiritual life. Notice Jude verse 12. These are men who are hidden reefs in your love feasts when they feast with you without fear. They care for themselves. Notice what he says here. They're clouds without water, carried along by winds. Autumn trees without fruit, doubly dead. uprooted. Excuse me. I'm not quite healthy. Of all the things that we could say about the person being described here in Jude verse 12, one thing I want to point out is this idea of being carried along by the winds. Autumn trees without fruit, doubly dead. Doubly dead. What does that mean to be doubly dead? I think one idea that you have here is empty promises. When you look at an autumn tree, what do you expect from that autumn tree? What are you hoping to find? And not just hope. I guess hope is too flighty a word. What do you believe ought to be there on an autumn tree? Fruit. It's the time of year. It should be there. I'll give you an analogy here. Last year, we did a gospel meeting. I say we. I bring my family wherever I go. We did a gospel meeting in Reno, Nevada. And one day we had some free time, so we crossed the border in California. And we went to a place called Apple Hill in California. It's a collection of apple orchards. A beautiful area. And of course, it was October when we went. You'd think there'd be some apples, right? Everywhere we went, they said, oh, we're all out of apples. We're all out of apples. We didn't have a good harvest this year because of the drought, I suppose. And I'm like, it's October. This place is called Apple Hill. And you're out of apples. Jude 12, this is my takeaway from Jude 12 as far as what we're trying to talk about today. Jude 12, to me, is the person who makes big empty promises. Again, there's a lot of other things you could say about the person described in Jude 12, the false teacher, but one aspect of that is the empty promises. Carried along by the wind, they're clouds that don't have water. They promise something and don't deliver. And man, I hate that, don't you? Living here in Phoenix, Arizona, when you see that cloud on the horizon, you're going like, hey, you are contractually obligated to give me something. If I hear thunder, you need to bring rain. It's empty promises, though. Trees that don't produce anything in their due season. Okay, here's the application then. Are you going to keep the promises that you make to God? It's easy when you're making like New Year's resolutions in January. Say, oh, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to read my Bible and go to church every week, and I'm going to break this habit. I'm not going to do that. Are you going to keep your promises? Or are you going to just make big boasts? Are we going to set goals for ourselves as a congregation that says we're going to love each other and take care of each other and reach out to each other? We're going to visit each other in the hospital and be with each other and make social contacts. We're going to have evangelistic contacts. And we're going to change things. We're going to be strong. And we're going to keep our goals. Or are we just making big empty promises? Autumn trees without fruit, clouds without water. One last verse for you. Ephesians 4 and verse 14. As a result, he says, we are no longer to be children, tossed here and there by waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of men, by craftiness in deceitful scheming. Again, there's an emphasis here on the level of commitment that a Christian ought to have with regard to his virtues and his principles and the things that he's going to stand up for. We're not supposed to let other people decide for us what our beliefs are. We're not supposed to let other people decide for us how committed we're going to be. We must decide that we will be fully committed. I can't commit for you. I can't make you grow up as a Christian either. I can tell you to grow up. Our elders can tell you to grow up. Your parents can tell you to grow up. I can tell you to grow up and mature. But until you decide to grow up, you never will. Let's end with a couple practical applications here. Face into the wind. Rather than being carried away by the wind, face into the wind. Face the challenges that are before you. I'm not saying it's wrong to make New Year's resolutions. What I'm telling you is it's wrong to make New Year's resolutions that you're not going to keep. First of all, commitment is the key. Many of us are more passionate about a sports team than we are about God. Take the passion that you have for your earthly activities. Take that passion and drive it into your faith. Don't take the lazy way out either. In Luke chapter 13, verse 24, it says, strive to enter by the narrow door, for many, I tell you, will seek to enter and will not be able to. I like that. Strive. Strive to enter by the narrow door. Don't take the lazy way out. Check and recheck your attitude. 2 Corinthians 13, verse 5 says, examine yourselves as to whether you are in the faith. Test yourselves. Are you really fully committed? Are you staying committed? Don't take my word for it. 2 John, verse 7, for many deceivers have gone out into the world. I'm not saying I'm a deceiver, but what if I was? Don't take my word for it. Believe something because you believe it. Not because I believe it or because the elders believe it or because someone tells you to believe it. What are you conforming to? We all know Romans 12 and verse 2. Don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your what? By the renewing of your mind. The change has to start in your mind. What are you changing? You can go to church, right? You can read your Bible. You can go through the motions of praying every day. You can do all the right things that you're supposed to be doing. But until that's changed, you're just going through motions. And don't follow the silly things either. Kids get lost because they follow a kite. Kids get lost because their ball bounces that way into the freeway. A ball is not worth it. If your ball bounces into the freeway, it's not worth it. There's a lot of things in life, in your life, work and activities, even people, they're not worth it for you to get lost chasing after them. Don't be the wind-driven people. So we're going to have our goals presentation here in a few moments, but I want to make sure that I offer an invitation to those who might have a spiritual need this morning. If you're not a Christian, then you ought to be. Mark 16:16 says, he who believes and is baptized shall be saved. But if you are a Christian and you've not been living right, this is also an opportunity for you to make things right with God. To publicly confess the things that you've done, so that you can have a loving group of Christians surround you with love and prayers, bring you back into the fold. Whatever needs you might have, please come forward as we stand and sing.